Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this 6th edition of Costa. I'm your host. My name is Andrew Mwansa, sitting in for Costa Mwansa. President Hakainde Hichilema recently commissioned First Quantum Minerals $1.25 billion Kansanshi S3 expansion project, which is expected to double copper production and extend the mine's lifespan by 20 years. The president described the development as a game changer that will significantly contribute to Zambia's vision for producing 3 million metric tons of copper annually by 2031. A detailed study commissioned by Premier Consult Limited evaluated the economic impact of both the Kansanshi S3 expansion and Enterprise Nickel mine. The report, authored by renowned economist and consultant Professor Oliver Sasa, highlights the potential of these projects to ingest over $1.5 billion in fresh investments, extend mining lifespans, diversify into nickel production, and create thousands of direct and indirect jobs. Now, beyond the numbers, however, the study also raises critical questions about Zambia's mining fiscal regime, infrastructure readiness, and the broader multiplier effects of mining on communities. Tonight, we sit down with Professor Sasa to unpack the findings of his report and better understand what these developments mean for Zambia's economy and generally speaking about the mining sector. Professor Oliver Sasa, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time to be a part of tonight's edition of Costa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Prof, let's begin off with getting a broader understanding and the overall benefits of the commissioning of the S3 project at Kansanshi and what this means for our broader economy.
Well, firstly, of course, let me just indicate that the report was commissioned by First Quantum Minerals to Premier Consult, and therefore it is their report. This was about 2.5, 3 years ago, at the beginning of the conceptualization of the entire project, and now it has come to fruition. This last week here, the president launched it. This is one of the major investments, single investment in the mining sector, not only in terms of its quantum of financial resource injection, but also in terms of its far-reaching implications for the wider economy. One that rivals it in recent times was actually the commissioning of the Trident project in Kalumbila, which of course also, as you are aware, belongs to the First Quantum Minerals. These are mammoth investments. You are talking about in excess of $1 billion United States dollars, but really it's not the numbers. Many times we look at the quantum of financial resources that are invested as the main criteria of determining whether something is important or not. It goes beyond that. Yes, of course, mining is a very important but very expensive enterprise. It requires deep pocket investors that come in, and most times these have to be sourced from outside the country. We don't as yet have sufficient resources at single company levels to embark at these levels. It speaks directly to how attractive the country is in terms of the fiscal regime that motivates investors out there to come to Zambia. For the mining sector, for me, this is really a verdict of good performance at the policy level with respect to the government that opened up the policy space to ensure that we invite to the extent possible the required finance to exploit the resources at our disposal. Let me mention here that the S3 expansion project, which is really what the President commissioned, was approved several years earlier by the owners of First Quantum Minerals, but they could not, until the environment was considered ripe enough, the fiscal regime within the mining sector. So essentially when they moved in and they began to invest that level of financial resources, it was not something that just came as a bang. It was something that was waiting in the wings for a while. What are we expecting from there? A number of things, and that is really speaking more directly to your question. Firstly, if you look at how the mining sector has developed since independence, you see the ups and downs, not only in terms of how much has been invested by different investors, both local and foreign. At one point, as you know, the mining sector were owned by the Zambian government on behalf of the Zambian people through nationalization when the then President Kaunda took over the helm of authority and investment in that sector. We hung around with that. Unfortunately, we didn't do a good job, and the government itself realized that we have to open up foreign direct investment to come in. Yes, we privatized it. You can still talk about how was the privatization undertaken. That is a completely different story. I think fundamentally it was the recognition that if you really are talking about mining investment and the sort of money that you need external resources. And those external resources would in fact rejuvenate, as they did, in terms of expansion of the investment in that very strategic sector in the economy. Mind you, you are talking about a sector that accounts for more than 60%, 65% of our export receipts. Our foreign exchange is the major contributor to the foreign exchange at the moment. Unfortunately, one must say, we need to diversify, but that's actually the bottom line. It's a major contributor to GDP, the growth of this economy. It's a major contributor to employment opportunities. Unfortunately, we haven't been doing very, very well until about 2021. If you look at the expansion of the mining sector, quarrying in the mining sector, over the 2011 to 2021, during the period of the PF regime, during President Sata and the late President Lungu, during that period, the mining sector grew by only 1.4% annually on average. That really was not sufficient to sort of like for an economy, large as we are, but also for a sector so strategic to the economy of Zambia. So essentially we are saying, can we perhaps do things differently? And therefore this S3 expansion project is a game changer in my view. We are talking about a development that will lead to extension of lifeline of the first quantum minerals in that segment by as much as 23 years, to be more precise in terms of the technical report that informs this estimation. You are talking about opportunities for expanded employment. At about 800, our estimation from the study that we did, about 800 jobs will be created. Now, that is direct employment. There is what we call indirect employment. We are talking about somewhere around 8,000 jobs being created. Indirectly. Essentially, what does that mean? It means that when you employ one miner, there are so many companies that are linked to mining, whether in terms of the suppliers, the contractors, and those that benefit from downstream and upstream in terms of that investment. You are talking about a multiplier effect that is expected to span across the entire economy, which is really, in a way, benefiting the large economy.
Are we getting the best deals out of these investments that are coming to the country? Besides, getting our fair share of taxes and employ our people, are we getting a fair share of what lies beneath us as a country?
That's a difficult question to answer with one response. It depends on what are you expecting out of your mining investment. How many are the players in there? Perhaps a more topical political issue really relates to, should the state also have direct participation, either as equity shareholders in the foreign companies or opening up their own mines? Why not? That has happened in other countries. Those are questions that are philosophical. They border on the policy position of government. But if you're asking me what I believe should be the case is that government should play a role, either directly or indirectly. They can acquire substantial amounts of shares in economic activities, including mining. But allowing government to play a role does not mean a subtraction or reduction in the appetite for foreign direct investment. What am I saying? What I'm saying is that there is no reason why, if government wants to participate through equity shareholdings in the mining sector, we should actually reduce how much we must attract foreign direct investment. Money is out there for the taking. And you need investors, not only in the mining sector, but across the board. And the more a country, Zambia, is attracted to foreign investment, the higher the likelihood, talking about the benefits, the higher the likelihood that you are going to benefit from this. Now, how? The more investment you put in an economy, the higher the treasury is going to collect by way of taxes. The higher the opportunities for creating employment, more the prospects of actually cashing in on what happens out there in the global economy. But here, now, and this is where it's even getting more interesting, if you're talking about the mining sector and the beneficiation. Copper is almost like one of those rare metals that now are very much in demand, mainly because of the green options in terms of energy requirements. You're talking about electric vehicles that are coming online at the moment, batteries that are needed to feed into the diversified energy sources beyond, like in the Zambian case, electricity from hydro. You are talking about the world that's moving in a direction that is really very supportive of the sort of thing that we can offer to the global market, copper, but nickel as well. You know, First Quantum Minerals also launched the nickel. Our report touched on nickel, and we are seeing really positive outcomes coming out of there. So benefits are not only in terms of internally and how much we can take advantage of what is obtained, but also exposure, external exposure to the sophisticated global markets where we can take advantage of the opportunities there. And that, for me, is important too. We live in a global village, as it were, and we have to be an integral part of the economy out there. What happens in Europe, what happens in Ukraine, for example, what happens in Russia in terms of the sort of challenge that you are seeing, global geopolitics, do affect us here. But at times, although they may appear to be challenges, they open up opportunities for us as a country. And that's what many countries in the world are doing, aspiring to be an integral part of the global village.
You earlier indicated that under the previous administration, our mining sector grew by 1%. The profile has increased in terms of investments to the mining sector. What are we doing right, Prof, that has seen these huge investments come into our country?
There are a number of things that we look at. The previous administration also were doing a number of good things, but perhaps it was really at the policy level, but perhaps it was really a challenge at the implementation. Sometimes we focus more on creating a hospitable environment for investment and invest very little in making sure that that environment goes and must go beyond policy pronouncements. It must get to other things, including the regulatory regime. How do you regulate the entry and exit of the investors? Talking about the legislation. How have we facilitated by way of changing and tinkering with our legislation to make sure that they are in sync with the changed policy regime? How and at what extent did we extend incentives to investors, not only foreign but locals, to get into here? But most importantly, Andrew, I think sometimes we miss this. That the attractiveness of a country, and this is where you are comparing the previous administration and this current one, and why now it seems things are opening up. For an average investor out there, the attractiveness of the Zambian policy regime in the mining sector is less dependent on how good or how bad it is, but how consistent, how predictable it is. I'll tell you one thing, that the average investor out there would prefer to get into a country with a less attractive policy regime, but that they can predict that in the next 5, 10, 15 years, it will remain the way it is. Because you see, the boards of these big multinationals that would want to come in here, they will plan based on assumptions about what the government offers. Sometimes it's better to have a bad policy that is predictable so that the investor can know how to mitigate and go around that problem and factor it in the planning, than having a policy position, and this is really how it was in the previous administration, that keeps on changing. When you thought you are about to get there, the policy regime changes. That is not good. The policy consistency, the policy stability that has characterized the post-2021 regime in the mining sector is what actually makes us even be hopeful that we can reach even 3 million metric tons in another 8 years. At the moment, you may have seen the figures. We are now in the third quarter of the financial year. We might actually, in the mining sector this year, we might hit 1 million metric tons. If we miss, it will be just by a very small margin. That tells you something, a beautiful story. What is happening? It means the sky is opening up. The policy regime is predictable. The incentive regime is attractive. But it has to go beyond that. And this is really where perhaps many Zambians have actually outcried this. Don't only open for the foreign investors. Create space also for domestic investment by locals like you.
One would wonder how these numbers are coming up, Prof, because the expectation was that by the fact that we're hit by the drought, and in effect the energy sector is still highly hit today. We've had one of the worst, load shedding in living memory. You'd think that factors like the mining sector will be heavily affected by load shedding. Yes, we're seeing growth in the mining sector. How would you explain this interplay? Because the expectation is that the numbers must reduce because of load shedding.
Yeah, it's called resilience at policy level and at facilitation of that policy. When you have drought, for example, it's perhaps God's way of testing you, how resilient you can be, looking at alternatives. Look at South Africa before I come to Zambia. South Africa, for about 3 years, was faced with a very serious shortage of electricity, as you recall. Load shedding was a characteristic of that economy. What has happened? Now, hardly any load shedding in South Africa, because you have to look at alternative sources of energy. What has happened in South Africa significantly is that they have been encouraged through incentives, all domestics, all individual households, to move out of the national grid through mainly solar and alternative sources of energy. When they move out, two things happen. The first one is that they become independent on themselves by way of the power that they are under their control, like in the Zambian case, ZESCO. You move away from ZESCO and depend on yourself, and therefore you are less complaining. But the beauty is that for the domestics, the consumption of power is much, much less than those in industry, especially for mining.
Mines.
At the moment, the mining sector consumes by somewhere around 53% of the entire power that's generated by ZESCO. So if most of us move away from the national grid, as they did in South Africa, you leave more power that you need for running the wheels of industry. You see what I mean? So the solution is, and this is actually what the government is doing now, provide an incentive that will allow you and me, as individuals, as citizens, to bring in alternative sources of energy beyond hydro. Right now, as you're aware, like for example, if you take an example of inverters and everything that goes into a package of a solar option, there's no tax there now. There's no duty, there's no VAT. You can bring them in. I tell my colleagues in government that you know what is happening. What has happened, and I must say this, is that while the government has removed the tax on the importation of these, we are still seeing the prices not coming down sufficiently. And the people that are benefiting are the ones that actually are bringing them in. And they take advantage of a good cost of bringing in and making super profits. If there is one example for me that I would recommend to government very strongly, is that the likes of Zambia National Service should come in, bring these in and sell them at cost.
Reflective prices.
Yes. So that you, to the extent you might appear, because essentially that means it's almost like a subsidy, because you forgo tax, VAT, you forgo duty, import duty. So it's the government subsidizing you. But the government, it will recoup, because then it will mean that you will be stabilizing power supply. And when you stabilize power supply to the average producer beyond the household, you are going to actually have more companies that depend on electricity more to declare higher profits, and the government will pick higher tax from the higher profit, and therefore you are enriching the treasury. For me, it's as simple as that. Can we find ways of popularizing alternative sources of energy, and especially solar, to move people away from the grid?
The reason for why I asked that question around how this is possible, where we have load shedding yet, our mining sector is doing very well, because
they imported as well, by the way.
Of course, I was about
a number of mines houses are importing their own electricity.
I was at Kansanshi just last year, looking at the S3 project before the commissioning by the president. One of the managers told me that they're importing very expensive power from the southern, power pool. And then now I'm getting to wonder, because if you're importing very expensive power, then this perhaps could potentially affect, your production. But yet we're seeing, a different story, altogether, and we're seeing a very good profile in terms of what's happening with our mines.
What it means is that if the alternative sources, including importation, was expensive, it means that the beauty that you see in terms of the bottom line of these average companies could have been even brighter and more attractive. That's what it means. It means that although you can find alternatives and remain still on more or less marginally increase, but if you can find alternative sources that are cheaper, then your expansion speed would actually be faster. Essentially, that means, and it speaks directly to something here, and I'm glad that you noticed that and you have been at Kansanshi. First Quantum Minerals have picked power from going west and going all the way to Kalumbila, for example. They have their own line. But the sort of expansion that we are seeing, including the S3, means that actually more alternative sources must actually come online. We need to encourage private companies to get in and invest in hydroelectricity. For a very long time, potential areas of investments were actually reserved for ZESCO. That's one. Secondly, we need, this is my view, I feel that actually we need more capital into ZESCO. ZESCO is still 100% owned by government. And the cost structure there, as you are aware, is not very attractive in terms of the tariffs. Can be cost reflective, but at the end of the day, we are not doing as well as we should if we allowed a little bit more investment, private investment. There are issues of whether you want to dismantle the generation, transmission, and distribution. There are good cases for that. And it's important that we begin to actually look at whether we will be a little bit more efficient. Because you see, many people, when you look at ZESCO, you look more in terms of how much they have. Little sometimes do we recognize that actually the manner in which ZESCO is managed, its own structure may be disabling. It needs to be reviewed, revamped. Perhaps there must be more things that are outsourced to the private sector rather than having a battalion of employees of ZESCO doing these things. The world is moving into outsourcing contracts where a company need not necessarily have its own employees to a level where there are efficiency gains if you allow somebody who is outsourced and providing what you thought you can do internally. These are options. There have to be studies that will actually look at these options. I'm not saying it has to be like that. But what I'm saying is, it's important to look at the structure of ZESCO starting from the board, including corporate governance, how the board is appointed.
When this crisis came in of load shedding, Prof, one would have expected that the private sector jumps on, to take advantage of the business.
A number have.
We have not seen so many. To what extent do you think the tariffs are the cause of not seeing so many players, come into the electricity subsector?
There are a host of reasons. First, of course, the sector must be sufficiently attractive to an investor. And by the way, there are many that have moved in and are making a difference at the moment, especially in the alternative segments, including solar. There are many companies that have moved in. But we're also talking about, and I would encourage, and I'm hoping to see, those that will go into even hydroelectricity. Hydroelectricity, let's not demonize it. It is still a cheaper alternative. Unfortunately, it's very vulnerable to climatic conditions and changes, El Nino effects. So if there's no water, there's no electricity. We've suffered from that. But there's so many other alternatives, or even expansion at that level. Batoka, for example, we've taken so long to invest in there. We will get gigabytes of exponential levels that would allow us as a country, perhaps jointly with Zimbabwe, to feed into the Southern African power pool in a manner that would actually secure, not only in terms of our domestic requirements, but you need money there, and that money need not, and shouldn't even come from governments. Public-private partnerships is really the most important way to go. Look at the dual carriageway. Not a single cent, single ngwe, has been released from the treasury to get into the dual carriageway, the private sector. You just need to get through that route. And I would like to see more and more of that formula getting into the electricity supply systems.
Let me get to the report, Prof. The report points out Zambia's recent economic distress, rise in debt, low FDI inflows, and fiscal challenges. How do these macroeconomic realities shape the mining sector's potential?
Firstly, there is no economy. There is no company in an economy that can function if the economy is stressed. No matter how efficient you want to be, if your economy is going downhill, any company that invests in that economy will suffer the very effects that are affecting the larger economy. It's a symbiotic relationships. There's a linkage there. You can't make a profit in an economy that is declining significantly. What does it mean? It means now that a number of things have happened. One of the things that we raised in the report speaks directly to the GDP growth, which has not performed. It didn't perform very well for a very long time. We are stabilizing that. This year, 2025, we have two estimations from the big gurus that actually usually help us estimate, the World Bank and the IMF. The World Bank are estimating our GDP growth this year to 5.8. IMF per annum growth, GDP growth. IMF is even more generous at 6.2. It means that there are things that happen that in spite of the drought, the level of resilience that has been recorded in the Zambian economy tells you something about where we are heading to. There are a number of things that might explain this. We are applying resources more prudently. We've managed to actually remove one of the worst effects on GDP growth and on macroeconomic stability, the debt. The last 2 to 3 years, the government has managed to, in fact, restructure. We have about 3 billion still unstructured. But we're talking about coming from a huge amount for about 11, 12 billion United States dollars. That is a plus because it allows us to have a headroom that allows us to do a lot of things that we couldn't do because we have been given relief through two ways in which actually it has been done. You reduce interest rates, we call a haircut. Reduce the interest rates, and many of them have given us sufficient, those who are owing us, including the Eurobond holders. A good haircut that allowed us to, as you save the debt, to pay less by the factor of reduction. Secondly, the tenor, the duration, which you are expected to pay the debt. It has been extended. So in other words, you are given more time to pay and less in terms of payment by the haircut, the reduction in interest rates. This, in fact, these are the fundamentals. If you listen to the Minister of Finance, and they said this many times, showing you that you see, what you are seeing now harvesting is really a reflection of the hard times that we've had, trying to renegotiate and trying to correct the problems that were created at the time when they came into power. We are now seeing the benefits of restructuring. But I've told my friends several times, especially those in government, that restructuring is one thing. We have to actually have ourselves a very clear plan going forward on how we take advantage of the restructuring, to focus on those sectors that promise the highest rewards, dividends. And you can easily name these. We are talking about mining here. But some of the fast-growing economies that we know, especially in developing countries, that have put in place well-structured systems and policy regimes, are those that target the sectors where the largest people reside in terms of beneficiation. In the Zambian case, it's obvious. Agriculture. If we can put our mind to it and do the right things, it's a president's song. Many times, and we're not talking about agriculture only in terms of crops. Most of us were growing, believing that agriculture is to grow crops. Animals, there's hope there. And really, if we go that way, it houses the largest number of poor people. A transformation in agriculture would transform the economy much faster, and we have the arable land that it takes. Expansion of copper, expansion of mining sector is labor saving. Many people miss this. You can grow, but you are wondering, but we are, in spite of this growth, we are not seeing changes in welfare because mining, especially modern mining, is labor saving. The computers, the machines take over. So although you are growing the economy, but you are growing the economy, what we call structure of growth. You are growing the economy in a sector that do not accommodate as many people in terms of benefiting. So you still see the economy is growing, GDP is growing, but the majority of people remain more or less the same. That is the question that has to be looked at. It's a developmental issue that needs to be in terms of resource allocation, in terms of focus of growth, in terms of support system that we extend to this. It all adds up. So if you look at agriculture, is one sector that if we actually are focused, we should make a huge substantial. And this is an economy where you're not even talking about the raw materials that are at our disposal in terms of land, water resources. 35% of the water resources in Southern Africa are here in Zambia. But we're talking about a huge market, not only in Zambia, but in the Congo, for example. Out there are countries in Southern Africa and up north that can depend so significantly on what we produce. We should be able to get more foreign exchange from agriculture than from copper.
From copper.
Just putting our house in order. And I think we are heading towards that if you look at the policy regime that are being crafted.
Just before I can get back to the report, you mentioned something very profound. And I want to find out, on behalf of the people that are watching tonight, Prof, how then do we translate, this economic growth, into people getting to feel the real effects of this growth? GDP is expected, according to IMF, to grow by over 6.2% as of December, this year. We're coming from 4 years ago where the economy was growing in the negative, now to where we're going, growing at above 6%. How do we translate this into people feeling the real impact?
Many people ask this question, and sometimes the answer they know is only that the explanation is not sufficiently structured to understand what really happens. The problem in many countries, including Zambia, is not the absence of money.
What is it?
It's not. In fact, money has a habit of being found if you have the right ideas. You can grow the economy exponentially. You can grow it even at 10%. But if the Gini coefficients, if the distribution of what the growth dividends is such that actually the majority of the resources that you have harnessed go to a smaller group of people. Equity, equality, the distribution of rewards of growth. It must be pro-poor, meaning growth itself is important. I'm not underrating the importance of GDP growth. Mark my word here. I'm saying growth is important. In fact, you cannot actually distribute anything if there's no growth. But don't stop at growth. Once you have made the money as a country, you must know how you distribute it. Who gets it? You have a situation in terms of Gini coefficient. Zambia is one of the worst in the world, actually, where about 10% of the Zambian people control 80% of the wealth. It's a distributional issue. And that's where you see, if in the Constituency Development Funds, many people don't even see the difference. There's no additionality. Yes, there is annually, there is additionality in terms of how much is expanded annually from one budget to another. What has happened is that when you decentralize, the same money that used to reside here, being planned and disbursed at the center, is the same money that the current government has decided it must go to where action is. It's not like Zambia has gotten much more money. No. That Zambia now has realized that you take money where it belongs. If it must be stolen, that's my view. If money must be stolen, I prefer that it's stolen by the person who it was targeted to benefit in the rural area, rather stolen by me, who is here in Lusaka. So the issue of theft should not be an excuse for not decentralizing. There are many challenges of decentralization and taking the money there in terms of distribution. But of course, at the end of the day, develop the capacities there rather than coming back. So your question is, how come, in spite of growth, economists are telling us, oh no, we have grown the economy, but we're not. I've heard that story so many times. It's just like you. Let me give you an example at a personal level. If your employer increases your salary by 100%, would that necessarily automatically increase your disposable income at household level at 100%? Not necessarily. Because if you used to drink in Kalingalinga, and now you feel you are richer, Andrew, you start
going to East Park.
To East Park. You go to Pamos. Your household will not benefit from that 100% increase. That's exactly what happens if the national economy. Increased money need not necessarily on its own translate into wealth creation for the majority of people. You have to plan for it. You have to redistribute that money. You have to ensure that money is not over-concentrated. So celebrating over GDP growth is good, but it's not sufficient. For me, my best celebration is when I'm seeing that there are more people that are benefiting from that growth than just growth on its own.
On its own. On nickel, Prof, the Enterprise project is projected to become Africa's largest nickel mine. How critical is this diversification from copper to Zambia's long-term economic stability?
First, let's look at how the structure in the mining sector is structured. Firstly, copper is dominant, not even in the larger economy, but also even in the mining sector. When we talk about mining in Zambia, most people believe that it's copper. It shouldn't be like that. There are so many minerals, including gold, by the way. You have seen in the study, we touched on the gold expansions, what we're expecting to see expanding as a result of the S3 project. But gold, at the moment, the one that is captured, not small scale or what interests people now, but the copper that First Quantum Minerals are producing in Kansanshi is a byproduct of copper production. The gold is a byproduct of copper. We haven't gone into there. We have several other minerals, even rare minerals in this country, that we have not fully exploited. Even copper itself, we have not as yet fully exploited the potential that the country has. At the time we were doing this study, only 55% of Zambia was mapped digitally to know where copper or the minerals are. You've seen the new government. They've, in the last 2 years, there have been aerial surveys, and they are doing that. Some of the parts of the country now, like Western Province, a significant portion of that is already digitized. We are waiting for the results, and they're going round and round. A country like Botswana, almost 99% is already digital. They know where is which mineral resource. So we must know where they are before we exploit them. Secondly, we have biased ourselves as if we were bought with a copper spoon in our mouth. We are biased towards copper for some strange reason. The majority of poor people that want to get into mining are in semi-precious stones, including gold, by the way, and amethyst, and several others. Our support system is not as positive, in my view, as what we are extending to copper mining. That must change. There's something else here when we talk about equity and equality and how much we benefit. I'm one person who is totally against calling someone an illegal miner, especially where you have not, and the president has spoken to this recently, especially in a situation where you have not actually put in place a proper system of registration. For me, the number of illegal miners, as we call them unlicensed miners, please. Don't call them illegal. Because you see, if you call them illegal, you are actually demonizing them. And yet, this is where, if you're talking about fairness in the benefits from the growth that seems to be emerging now, that's where the majority are. I would like to see a situation where we have a Marshall Plan in the registration of all those that are interested in mining for different types of minerals. Consider them as unregistered, and your target should be registering them so that they operate within the confines of the law and they pay tax too. Immediately you call them illegal, it means that even when they die, the young people that die on the copper belt, you've seen that?
Yeah.
You don't even cry properly because you think they're illegal, because you have labeled them illegal. The British say, give a dog a bad name and hang him. Call someone a bad name and no one will cry. And yet we also know that most of those boys that die in those holes are not the miners themselves. They're Jerebos. They're hired by big guys who are actually sending them in there. So the issue then becomes, as a system, as a government, have we prepared ourselves to regularizing and registering these young people? Because that is a source of livelihood. For me, the amount of interest that you see among the young people getting into mining is a reflection of wanting to take advantage of what it obtains. If our system is too slow to register, it's too slow to train people to know how to best exploit the resources, the problem for me would not be with the little boys that actually get affected adversely. The problem will be government, you are not moving with sufficient speed to take advantage of what is being provided by the resource base of the country.
And so far, you think the rate at which government is moving is very slow? Because
it's slow.
Just recently, the Minister of Mines did announce, the giving out of over 90 licenses to artisanal miners around Mufumbu and others.
It's commendable, but it's slow.
The process of formalization.
Yeah.
You still didn't fully answer my question on nickel and it becoming the largest nickel mine in the world.
Yes, it is. It's the largest in Africa, but about number 6 or so in the world. It's big. It's a more valuable mineral than copper, as you know, in terms of price. But most importantly, it's one mineral, a rare mineral, that is required in green energy options, batteries, carbon batteries. The world is moving in that direction, partially driven by global warming that has led to challenges in the sources that we use. But it also, in terms of the alternative fuel energy, the oil that we use is not environmental friendly. So the world now is moving in that direction, and we are lucky as a country. We do have nickel. We want to see expansions of this. Unfortunately, what we have in there, I can't remember the estimation. I think it's about 16 to 20 years. It can be expanded depending on further exploration. But it's one mineral that is very vital for us to expand and diversify our mining sector. But I go beyond that, and that's why I digressed a little bit more into the small mining as well.
Prof, in financial terms, the report estimates tax and royalty contributions that will increase, significantly. How transformative could this be for government revenue given the current fiscal, pressures?
Firstly, of course, at the end of the day, the value of a company to the treasury is its contribution to the tax net. And the more a company is able to pay as much, and the better, because the tax is what ultimately translates in what government can use to do social welfare provisioning, whether you're talking about hospitals, you're talking about schools, you're talking about water and sanitation, all those that actually directly affect positively the people. So yes, we need to see this. Now, First Quantum Minerals, the expansion itself, I can give you a few figures in terms of what was anticipated from and what we should see now that the mine itself is coming out. The S3 project is projected to increase substantially the amount of copper that is produced. It's going to increase by 135,000 metric tons annually by the year 2030. In other words, if it was not put in place, if it hasn't been commissioned by the president last week, if nothing happened, on the basis of the production figure that we're looking at before the S3 project, by 2024, last year, copper production by First Quantum Minerals were going to be reducing by 4% every year. Now, there is an exponential expansion of about 160,000 metric tons, in addition, over and above, per annum, up to 2030. So, what are we seeing? We are seeing an increase. We are also seeing, I mentioned this, an increase in the number of years of Kansanshi life, about 23 years. It might be more, that's an estimation. As they explore, as they do more drilling, they might in fact increase it to probably another 50 years. That is opportunities for getting more money from the mining sector. But if you look at the treasury itself in broad terms, it's not only First Quantum Minerals. You're talking about so many mining houses that are coming to Zambia that have indicated and showed interest. Both those that are within, like Rwanda, for example, they're taking out $2 billion US investment. Cobalt is coming. Anglo-American Corporation, at the time when we were nationalizing, was predominant. They are right now on the ground explorations. These are the heavyweights globally that we need to attract. So you are seeing, with these changes, in terms of expansion, you are seeing something good. Let me indicate also here, the royalty contribution of the expansion, the S3 expansion, is estimated to increase by an average of 270 million per annum over the 2025 this year and 2030. So again, you are seeing an exponential expansion that will lead to more money in the pocket of the treasury. But it comes back to the same thing that we were discussing. More money in the treasury need not necessarily translate into more money in your pocket. And so the onus is on the government, and I think they're doing that, to ensure that more money reaches the people in Kaputa, in Shangombo, in Kalabo. Because that's actually at the end of the day, when you are talking about how is development, how is GDP growth translated into providing for the majority of the people, which is a distributional issue, different from the growth issue. Yeah.
You also emphasize training skills, transfer and local procurement. How well is Zambia positioned to ensure these benefits remain within the country?
One of the things that you see is that when the mine, like now, First Quantum Minerals, but several other mines, they have training programs that allow them to be equipped with the skills that probably you may not get in the classroom, in universities or colleges, but that will equip you hands-on to know how to manage a mine, to know how to process those minerals. These are Zambian indigenous people. This is positive. among the things we call multiplier effects, that it's not only just the treasury that benefits. There is also education. There's corporate social investment or corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
There's if you go to First Quantum Minerals and look at what they've been doing in Kalumbila and in Kansanshi.
I did see that, yeah.
Yes, it's quite substantial. So there are benefits here. But there's also something else. You know, if you are talking about local procurement, which is an important aspect, like are they actually just getting things from outside that they need into the mining sector? At the moment, what we have established is that 80% of procurement by First Quantum Minerals is local. But we have to be careful there. By local, we include foreign companies that are locally based. We want to see a bit more of Zambian, real indigenous Zambians also benefiting from that. We have to prepare ourselves to take advantage of the expansion, exponential growth in the mining sector so that we feed into at those levels, including, especially where we have a comparative advantage, feeding the mines through agricultural expansion. Because out there, Northwestern province in particular, there's so much that's going on, and people need to be fed. And we should actually take advantage of that, especially for those in agriculture, to feed the new copper belt, as we call it now.
We initially touched on it a little bit, but perhaps I need you to expand on it. Energy and infrastructure constraints are also highlighted in this report. Prof, in your view, what urgent steps should government and private players take to align infrastructure with mining growth?
There are a number of things that we need. Firstly, to expand mining growth, you need to secure the power that it requires. We touched on this, electricity, so we want to do much on that. Electricity is key. You can't turn the wheels of industry in those mines without actually a secure supply of electricity, both hydro and alternative sources of energy. Secondly, the network, the road network. Look at actually what's happening. Now we are going to have a dual carriageway. But have you driven to the Copper Belt and see how our roads are being plowed by these heavy equipment that are coming from the south, getting to Northwestern? I have a small holding in Shimabala where I see these trucks and with weird-looking structures that are going up north. I celebrate, but I also mourn. Our roads are being plowed. Why? Because we have not invested in a railway system in a manner that is befitting and corresponding to the exponential growth that we're expecting. I was on the board of Zambia Railways, briefly. Things were not actually happening, and they have not happened. You can see a situation where, with the growth that we are seeing now, infrastructure development, especially with respect to transportation, you have to have the road network, but also the railway network to be supportive of the growth that you want to see. Communication network too, thirdly. The beauty is that this is one sector that is really growing very fast, especially with the artificial intelligence. Communication is becoming cheaper, but connectivity is important. You cannot, as a mine, but also as an industry, expand if you are not connected to the world, connected to the internet, connected in a manner that allows you to swiftly make decisions and to communicate. Because right now the world is racing. If you are not in the race, you will not actually take advantage of the dividends that actually come with the artificial intelligence, AI, for example, to be able to. So this is part of the infrastructure, both in terms of the hardware, but most importantly, especially for communications, the software. We need to be ready. We need to improve upon to be connected. One of the biggest problems in Africa is connectivity. Connectivity is still, internet connectivity is still very, very, very expensive in Africa. In Zambia too. There are countries that I've been to which are much more expensive than Zambia. But we have to lower the costs so that we can take advantage of the growth dividends.
What specific tax and policy reforms would you recommend, to create the win-win environment you mentioned in this report?
Tax incentives are open to both in local and foreign. And the government does extend this. If you are talking about the mining sector, there are a number of incentives that we see. Mining, you do a number of things. The first, of course, is exploration. Exploration is very expensive. And where you explore, you can actually invest billions of dollars and you don't really get, because you don't know what's down there. Of course, now with the AI and all the advancements in communications, they are able to do it more efficiently in a more predictable manner. But unfortunately, exploration is expensive. And that's why, for most of us Zambians, we are not in there yet. But you have to give an incentive. So for the privates that get into exploration for mining, mineral resources, incentives by way of tax regime, tax incentives, duty drawbacks, giving you, when you start producing, perhaps even a tax holiday of 5 years, where the government will say, you have now started operating, we'll give you 5 years, everything that you get. We want you to replant it so that you expand. By the time we'll knock on your door 5 years down the line, we'll know that you are now stable. Incentives on equipment, importation, is another way of ensuring that you capitalize, you recapitalize the sort of investment that you need for you to be able to. The idea is a subsidy or a tax rebate, a tax holiday is a subsidy. But that subsidy will be paid back much later, more handsomely. And this is really my message, and I've always said this in public audiences, that sometimes in Zambia we talk about, no, tax them, no, we want the mines. Yes, they must be taxed. You must know how to tax them, and you must know how to collect your tax. Sometimes we fail even to do and collect what is due to us in terms of reporting. Sometimes they underreport. Multinationals are everywhere in the world, they're like that. So you have to be sure that the mining sector, especially the ministry in charge of mining, must have robust systems of ensuring that reporting and controls are strengthened. But at the end of the day, if you don't know how to collect your tax, then there's the problem. And that problem squarely lies on you because you are not doing efficiently what you are supposed to do. But tax they must pay. But incentives are also a way of ensuring that you are equipping somebody with limited resources, especially for the locals. I would like to see more incentives, including tax holidays, for locals that want to get into mining in a manner that will allow them to be competitive with the foreigners. How do you explain a situation more than 60 years since independence? We don't have a single Zambian company that really is in this big contestation with the big companies that are mining our copper. Name it. Nothing. They're all foreign. Now, the issue then becomes, and you've seen, the Socialist Party does talk about this. Other people sometimes also talk about it. Let's nationalize and have the mines controlled by the company, by the country. I don't subscribe to that personally. Probably because I've lived too long. I've seen it before when the government was running the mines, and I've seen why actually it motivated us to privatize. But if the government wants to get in, why should it be through acquisition, nationalization of mines that are already in existence? Why don't we explore and create our own mines, our own local mines? Is it that we have to wait for somebody to come and invest, then you go and grab his assets? But that's not good, because it sends a very wrong signal to the world out there, to the investors out there that will want to come in here. Because when they come here, they're not charity. They want to come and invest, but they should be assured of the security of tenure, the security of their investment. But if the government wants to get in, it need not necessarily privatize and nationalize First Quantum Minerals. They should actually, well, at the moment, as you are aware, the government controls, on average, 20% of shareholding in almost all the mines. Right. You know that. Yes, you know that. The CCMIH does hold, and so, and we get handsome. They declared dividends recently, quite handsomely. Yeah. So yes, we do. But if the government wants more mines to be owned 100% by the state, I'm not so sure whether that's the way to go. Why don't we open our own mines? We start from scratch.
We're doing well with Mopani, 49.51.
Yeah, that's fine. You can do that. I'm not against the government having higher stakes in the mining sector, but for God's sake, make sure that you don't do that at the level where you sacrifice attractive, big pocket investors that know the skill, that have the technology, the know-how, and the money. We need them to say that chase them away. We tried that during Kaunda's time. It didn't work very well. Probably I'm unduly influenced. My doctorate is on the regulation of mining companies in Zambia and another country. That was my case study. I've seen it where governments, especially our systems of government, our bureaucracies, to make them run businesses of that magnitude. I have very few examples of countries where that has worked. And I would be the last one to recommend it to happen here.
How do you see the global demand for green metals like copper and nickel shaping Zambia's mining future?
I think that's the way to go. And I mean, our discussion so far has focused on the importance of diversification. We need to diversify beyond copper. Fortunately, copper is a green metal, in a way, actually. Yes, because it's one of those that we need for the green energy. But we need to also take advantage of all these manganese. We have to take advantage of nickel. We have to take advantage of these rare minerals that some of them probably not even discovered, but through the expansion in exploration, we may discover that we have minerals, including oil, who knows, and we should take advantage of those. For me, it's a diversification beyond copper. Beyond copper.
As we conclude, Prof, if Zambia were to get one thing right in order to fully capitalize on these investments we've talked about, what would that thing be?
The first thing is, for me, let's have a consistent, predictable policy environment. For me, that is key. I've said that before, many times. A predictable policy environment, not only in the mining sector, but everywhere, is what attracts investors, not only foreign investors, but local investors. Because really what attracts me to be in a particular sector, even as an indigenous Zambian, is whether, because I have to look at how much am I going to pay, how much benefits am I going to realize from what I'm doing. If the goalpost keeps on changing, I will not move there.
Professor Mwansa, thank you so much for making time to be part of tonight's edition of Costa.
You're welcome.